Thank you, Jason and Rick, and to all of you for joining me. I am not personally a morning person, so I'm particularly grateful that all of you joined us this early morning for this conversation. I'm here to talk about the future of urban mobility and what that means for our people and our communities, and how we might use the combination of existing infrastructure with some new technology and innovation to get there. How we can bring private cars together to serve the public good and help reduce congestion, greenhouse gas emissions, and improve land use along the way. Now, I'm curious, how many of us here today, raise your hand if you drove here alone? Yeah, a lot of us. Well, it turns out you are in good company. You and the 270 so cars that drove here were among the billion or so cars on the planet today. That is equal to the population of the US and Europe combined. But it's easy to demonize the car. The car isn't the problem or the challenge for communities. What is the problem is how we use them, which is alone. When you are in traffic, or if you pulled up to a red light on your way this morning and you looked right and left, chances are that you and the people in the cars next to you were in the car alone. And what does that mean? Well, first and foremost, it means traffic. We here in the greater Boston area are no stranger to that. And in major cities around the world, residents and commuters are spending several weeks a year stuck in it. But on top of that, those cars sitting there are emitting greenhouse gas emissions. So 22% of all carbon emissions that are pumped into our atmosphere every year are coming from transportation. And surely the greater Boston area has had its fair share of challenges with transportation and congestion. And not only is this a strain on our residents and our people, but on our economy as well. When we are sitting in traffic, we are not being productive. When we're sitting in traffic, it makes it hard to think about living and working in this community. It means that we are not home with our families or contributing to the broader economy or society. We're stuck. It also means that when we have challenges with transportation, we challenge the businesses that rely on patrons and employees every day. And this congestion issue, this single occupancy car issue, is not just a challenge for traffic and pollution, it's also a land use challenge. So when each of us is driving in our cars alone, and we get to our office or our restaurant or our place of work, we need a place to put them. And in most major cities, 20% of land is going to housing these chunks of steel. This is further complicated by the fact that cars sit idle 95% of the time. So land that could be used for parks or green space or schools, affordable housing, small businesses, is going towards housing these cars. And the same is true in the greater Boston area. We were talking earlier about the Seaport, one of the most vibrant up-and-coming neighborhoods that used to have lots of parking, now has lots of business. And we are reinvesting in creating more space for these cars that need to sit there because folks don't have other options. They need to drive in and have a place for their cars. Now, how did we get here? Why is this a challenge? Why don't we have better options? Well, part of that challenge is urban planning. Even in communities with great public transportation systems, and I would count Boston among them, but New York, which has an extraordinarily extensive public transit system, 2.7 million cars drive into Manhattan every day. And this is particularly the fact for residents of low-income neighborhoods. They live in neighborhoods that we sometimes refer to as transportation deserts. They are less likely to have public transit hubs or easy ways to get to and from. In fact, the Brookings Institution estimates that about 30% of jobs in the US require a 90-minute commute. This means that the people who need these jobs the most are forced because they have no other option to drive their car into work every morning in order to maintain their job. And once you have a car, you're more likely to use it. So Uber's founders were frankly not focused on these challenges when they started this company about 8 years ago, as Jason said. Their goal was simply to enable folks to open an app, tap a button, and get a ride. But as Uber and as ride-sharing, this idea has picked up steam, we've actually recognized that there's enormous appetite for a better way. And it's helped us recognize that the status quo, our existing transportation ecosystem, is insufficient, inefficient, and unequal. And that we believe there's a better way. That combining the existing infrastructure, these public transit systems, with the new technology and new options that things like ride-sharing bring to bear, we can actually create a transportation system that is more equitable, more affordable, and more reliable. So let's talk about how. Let's start with reliability. And let's take one of the cities in our country where you would imagine reliability is most challenging, Los Angeles. Southern California, the greater Los Angeles area, covers about 5,000 square miles. This is an area that is extraordinarily challenging for a transportation system to serve. And that manifests itself in all of the cars in the Los Angeles area. And yet, with the technology and the innovation and the system that ride-sharing bring to bear, you can get a ride in under 10 minutes throughout that 5,000 square mile area. And the same is true here in the greater Boston area and throughout Massachusetts. So these series of maps show the expansion of Uber's network throughout greater Boston, starting in 2012 when we started, all the way over on the left, when Uber was available primarily downtown, in and around Boston, and has expanded since then. And if we blew this out to 2017, to today, you would see that you can actually get an Uber ride not only throughout the greater Boston area and here in Waltham, but in Worcester, in Springfield, in Amherst, in Northampton, in the Cape and the Islands, in areas that are historically challenged in providing their residents and employees easy ways to get around. Moreover, one of the stats that I'm most proud of as someone who grew up in the greater Boston area is that we're not just serving areas like the Back Bay and Beacon Hill and even here in Waltham, but we're providing reliable transportation in areas like Dorchester and Mattapan and Springfield and Worcester. In fact, a 2013 study by Nelson Nygaard found that if you lived in a neighborhood in Boston like Dorchester or Mattapan or Hyde Park, 35% of people had to wait upwards of 20 minutes to get a taxi. And that's if the taxi showed up at all. I'm so proud to say that on the Uber platform, residents of those neighborhoods can get a ride with 96% reliability, with 3 to 5 minute ETAs. That is life-changing for a resident of that neighborhood who suddenly has a more reliable way to get where they need to go. It's also interesting to think about when the system is reliable. As you all know, Uber is available 24/7. But when are people actually using this service? This graph shows one of the earliest use cases when we launch in a city, which is late night. And it shows the frequency of requests over the course of a Friday evening. And perhaps unsurprising, we see an abundance of requests, a small peak around the time that a lot of people are going out, and an enormous peak when people are coming home. It also happens that this late night peak is the highest frequency of alcohol-related auto fatalities around the world. And for many people who used to have limited options, this meant leaving a restaurant or a bar, picking up their keys, and getting in their car. This is dangerous for them, and it's dangerous for everyone else on the road. And now they have another option. And the same pattern holds here in Massachusetts. So you see this black line, which is historical alcohol-related crash fatalities in the greater Boston area, and the blue line overlays the frequency of Uber trips on weekend evenings. And you can see that people are turning to ride-sharing, to this better option, at the exact same time that they were put at the most risk in the past. it's not just late night that people are turning to ride sharing. Ride sharing has become an incredibly popular option for daytime and, in fact, for commuting. So this map here shows London, a morning commute Uber ride frequency around London. And 30% of trips in the greater London area are ending within 200 meters of a tube stop. People are actually using this new technology in tandem with the existing public transit system to get where they need to go, where that Uber ride is providing them last mile service or first mile service to get to the transit hub so that they can then jump on the tube and get into work. And we actually find that when the public transit system evolves and changes, that the patterns of ride sharing follow. So this map shows what happened when London actually extended its tube service into the suburbs during late night evening hours. And we actually saw the request pattern on our Uber platform change. We actually saw a decline of requests in the downtown area where the tube had been available previously, and an increase in requests in those outer geos where the tube was now available. So people were following the last mile pattern through the public transit system and using Uber to get home to their homes. And we see very similar patterns here in Greater Boston. So this map shows Uber pool rides that go to and from T stops during the morning commute. And you're seeing people extend the T from places like Malden Center and Forest Hills and my hometown of Braintree, who are taking rides to those public transit stops and then jumping on the T and getting in where they need to go, which we believe, and we are seeing early signs, that that can help reduce that congestion and help people make better use of the public transit systems that are already existing to get where they need to go more reliably. This has been so exciting to us and to our incredible partners at the MBTA that we've been able to take on some partnerships with them. So when the MBTA decided to end its late night service several months ago, we worked with them to identify the neighborhoods and areas that would be most affected. And we actually set up explicit flat rates along those T lines to ensure that late night partygoers and employees, bartenders and wait staff, could get home through ride sharing, if not through the MBTA. We've also set up a program that I'm incredibly excited about, a partnership with the MBTA's RIDE system, which is its program to serve people with disabilities, to ensure that those people have access to ride sharing, which for many people who use the ride can be a more affordable, reliable, real-time option for them to use. So again, by expanding the options through these kinds of partnerships, we can leverage the existing system, but provide new levels of reliability to folks who rely on them. It's also been exciting to see that this innovation and this partnership doesn't need to come just through explicit programs, but it can actually come through leveraging the data that we have. So just a couple months ago, we launched a program called Uber Movement, which allows public policymakers and urban planners to use the data that we collect on our system to understand where people are moving. Where are the biggest gaps in the existing public transit system, and where do we need to invest? And this information is now available to public policymakers around the country to help come up with their own great ideas for how to improve the transit system. Now, that's reliability, but what about affordability? In order for people to truly give up their cars or leave their cars at home, the system needs to not just be reliable, but also affordable. And for many people, Uber, Uber Black, Uber X is a great option, but there are far more people who can't afford that on a daily basis. So how do we crack that nut? How do we ensure that this system is affordable for everybody and every use case? Well, one idea is to put more people in fewer cars, carpooling. But carpooling is really hard. Public policymakers have been trying to make carpooling work since World War II and then later the oil shocks of the 1970s. But it's a really hard thing to make work. It's hard to convince people to carpool with friends or neighbors or people in their area. And it's also hard to coordinate. How do you ensure that the person is leaving around the same time that you do, going to the same place that you are? Well, here's where technology comes in. Through our our system, we observed that there were a number of trips that were taking duplicative routes around duplicative times. And we thought, if we can just find a way to get those folks to share their rides, we can actually enable carpooling through our app, through our technology. The question was, are people going to do this? Are people going to be willing to get in a car with a neighbor or someone from their area going from a similar place to a similar destination? So we decided to try it. And the answer has been resoundingly yes. It turns out when you create the reliability and you create the affordability, people, of course, are willing to share rides to get where they need to go. And this has been particularly true here in the greater Boston area. This shows the pattern of expansion from when we launched in fall of 2015 on the left to about a year later in 2016. And if we blew the example out, it would look a lot like the original expansion of Uber at large that we talked about a few minutes ago. People are taking to this pool product in droves. And in fact, today, Uber Pool represents 30% of all trips that happen on the Uber Boston system. Moreover, Uber Pool is broadly available all the way up to Andover, down to Foxborough, even on Martha's Vineyard. Can you pool? This is making a better use of the cars that are on the system, bringing together people who are taking similar rides, and allowing them to do so at an unprecedented level of affordability, and is something that is incredibly exciting to me as someone who lives in this area. Now, if you want to fast forward a bit and see where we're headed with this Uber Pool system, take a look at San Francisco, which has had Uber Pool a bit longer than Boston. And on the right, you see the traffic patterns of Uber Pool trips in the city today. On the left, you can see what that city would have looked like if those were UberX or Uber Black, single occupancy trips. And there's a great deal more congestion. So already we see Uber Pool making a dent, not only in offering a more affordable option to people, but also a less congested option by bringing folks together. In just 6 months of last year, Uber Pool reduced the number of miles driven on our platform by 312 million miles. That's an extraordinary number of people who are sharing their rides. It reduced the number of the gallons of fuel by 6.2 million gallons. That's enough to fill 9 Olympic swimming pools, which meant that over 55,000 fewer metric tons of gas were sent into the atmosphere. And these are just the early days. Now you say, when we bring together the reliability and the affordability, that's great, but is this really going to change people's choices and options to drive their own cars? Well, we are seeing very promising early signs of yes. 10% of millennials who use the Uber platform are already reporting that they are either giving up their cars or never buying one to begin with, due to the affordability and reliability that they're seeing in this combined ride-sharing and public transit system. And these are the very types of people that Massachusetts wants so badly to retain. All those folks who come here for school or for training, and we want to stick around, who now have better options thanks to the combination of a multimodal transportation system. I often wonder, will my daughter ever get a driver's license? And it's a really interesting thing to think about. If she has an option that's more affordable, more reliable, and gets her where she needs to go. And we are just scratching the surface of progress here. Today, 4% of global miles driven happen in a ride-sharing system. But Morgan Stanley estimates that by 2030, that number could be as high as 25%. And things get really interesting when you start to add self-driving technology into the mix. And we have a video here that will play in the background so you can take a look. We are just starting to experiment with self-driving technology in a few of our Uber markets, Pittsburgh and Arizona and San Francisco. And this technology, to be clear, is in very early days. We still have a lot of work to do to ensure that these cars can fare our infamous Boston winters and Boston cow paths and all of the many variables that they encounter on the road. But what's really exciting to us is that the OECD estimates that if you combine ride sharing, options like Uber Pool, with things like self-driving cars, we can actually reduce the number of cars on the road by 90%. 90%. And as someone who frequently sits in 93 or 495 traffic, that's really exciting. And you can imagine the impact that that reduction in cars on the road would have not just on congestion, but also pollution and land use and quality of life and productivity of a city or a community. So ultimately, this is our vision for the future, where we can combine existing infrastructure and public transit systems with new technology and new innovation and new systems to create a transportation ecosystem that is better for everyone, that helps reduce congestion and reduce greenhouse gas emissions because people have better options. They have a better way. That helps reduce the amount of land required in every city to housing cars because people want to share rides and they have more efficient, effective ways to get around. The exciting thing is the future is well within our grasp. We have the ability to support not only policies and environments that are fertile ground for this kind of innovation, but also to encourage folks to start getting into the habit of sharing their rides, take advantage of this multimodal transportation system that we have today, so that as this technology develops, we have a group of people and a community that is ready for it. This is a community that I want to live in, and I'm extraordinarily excited to help shape, along with all of you.